Building consensus and putting the yes case and explaining to people what the model will be, what the question will be. We don't know that yet. That's what we're about to undertake, a consultation right through Australia to get the answer to those questions.
Referendum minute.
Well, the Constitution is a very short document. It literally has only the bare bones of the most important parts of our system of government in it. And exactly how those work in practice, how they're constituted, is always left to legislation. So, for example, the Constitution presently says that the Parliament shall be directly chosen by the people. And so you would hope that that would be the sort of principle that was in a constitution. But exactly how the people choose the Parliament, the electoral laws, all of those rules that surround election, all of that is left to legislation that can be changed and altered over time. So the idea that there are basic principles, the bare outlines of these institutions in the Constitution, but that these are fleshed out through ordinary legislation is a very common idea and a desirable way to approach your Constitution, in my view.
Building consensus and putting the yes case and explaining to people what the model will be, what the question will be. We don't know that yet. That's what we're about to undertake, a consultation right through Australia to get the answer to those questions.
Referendum minute.
One of the arguments that has come up against the Voice is that we don't know the detail. But that is a little bit putting the cart before the horse, because the detail will come through ordinary legislation enacted by the Parliament under Section 129(3). Parliament will actually have control over the details, which is basically ordinary legislation. And we don't vote on ordinary legislation. We vote on changes to the Constitution. So we would be voting to confirm that Parliament has that power, but that would be it. Those details will be worked out under Section 129(3) after the Voice is created. And those details, in my opinion, should be worked out in consultation with Indigenous people, which is itself a process, which is why we're not getting the detail now, because, that process has to happen. So I think there has been a bit of confusion about this issue of detail, because we're not voting on the detail. Parliament will have control of the detail. And the other thing that will mean is that future parliaments will be able to change those details. And that's important. You don't put detail in a constitution because the Constitution is so rigid, you can't change it.
One of the main things we keep hearing, though, Ken White, is there's no detail. There's no detail. We'll decide when there's detail. You're telling me the detail's there.
Look, I would tell everybody, go to the National Indigenous Australian Agency, download the report on the Voice and look at the pages I've just recommended, pages 16 to 17. That is the detail. Now, the legislative detail, if it reflects the model that our people have raised in the various reports, is put into place, then there is no excuse to say you do not know the detail.
So is it
In the Constitution, it's stated that judges need to retire at 70 years of age. They rue that day now, and what they should have said was that the judge's retirement needed to be determined by the Parliament so that we don't have a situation where all judges have to mandatorily retire at 70. And that's why the Constitution now is about principle, and the detail comes later.
Polls. And it's because of two main reasons. Firstly, the government didn't work out details about how people would be appointed to the advisory body before it announced the referendum. And even now, Linda Burney says that questions about who and how the Voice members will be chosen will all be nutted out later on after the votes have been cast.
To people what the model will be, what the question will be. We don't know that yet. That's what we're about to undertake, a consultation right through Australia to get the answer to those questions.
Now, Linda Burney says that questions about who and how the Voice members will be chosen will all be nutted out later on after the votes have been.
All judges have to mandatorily retire at 70. And that's why the Constitution now is about principle and the detail comes later.
I think it's actually a really good question. And I think here's part of the tricky situation we're in. At the moment, we're asking what I think is pretty basic, which is just to be heard. But even that notion can be quite an affront for people who aren't sure how it's going to operate, aren't sure who's going to be speaking. And I guess, a lot of people talk about there's not enough detail in the referendum, and as Uncle Tom pointed out, the more information, the more decisions that are made in lieu of the principal argument, there's more opportunity for that to be controlled, for people to pick that up and say, oh, I don't like that, or if things change later down on the track, there isn't a chance to rechange the Constitution. So
If the referendum is passed, the next step will be to develop and pass through the Parliament legislation to establish the Voice, to provide the details around how it will be composed and how it will operate, and to, in that sense, bring it into effect. That legislation will take a while, I think, to negotiate. There will need to be discussions with First Nations people themselves. There will need to be discussions in the Parliament. And I imagine it will be quite a lengthy piece of legislation. But in due course, that will be drafted. It will be considered by both Houses of Parliament. And let's assume that it passes in an approved form. Even after that, there will be other steps to be taken.
So tonight you've given us more detail than I've heard in many, many weeks of the Voice campaign going so far. Why can't the Yes campaign say it'll be a building in Canberra, it'll meet 4 times a year, there'll be 24 people on it, and they'll give advice to government which government can ignore or not?
Okay, Claire, I've got to explain this. That's Model A. There might be a Model B that has 25 people, not 24, or 32, or 18, right? It'll depend on the government of the day and the Parliament of the day as to what. And the problem with our Constitution is you can't spell out Model A, B, C, D, E, F, all possibilities. All you can do is leave it to the Parliament to determine at the time what the details are. And the actual provision that we're voting on, the 92 words that we vote on October the 14th, actually says this is the answer to the question of detail. The Parliament shall have power to make laws. That's the answer to the detail. The Parliament shall have power to make laws about the Voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. In other words, everything about the Voice is subject to Parliament. And guess whose job it is to supply the detail? It's actually not the government. The provision doesn't say the government shall. The provision says the Parliament shall. So, I or the leader of the government or anybody else could say, this is the detail here. That is only a proposition. The actual detail needs to go through the House and it needs to go through the Senate. It's got to get a majority somehow through the Senate, not controlled by the government. And in 5-10 years' time, it's entirely possible that a new Parliament decides, oh, we want to change the Voice. And they could do that. A new Parliament could change the model of the Voice. That is our democracy. That is how our lawmaking process works. We, the people, amend the Constitution, and then it's the Parliament that enacts the laws under the powers that we've approved. So it's this whole debate about detail has been deceptive. It has been deceptive because nobody can really say it's Model A or it's Model X. You know, the only honest answer to the what is the detail question is the detail will be determined by Parliament.
Building consensus and putting the yes case and explaining to people what the model will be, what the question will be. We don't know that yet. That's what we're about to undertake, a consultation right through Australia to get the answer to those questions.
Nick Mana.